All right, let's shift into college football. Brant, Michigan takes care of business against Nebraska. It clearly was their best played game of the year on both sides of the ball. Your thoughts on this Michigan team? Did they make your ears perk up a little bit? Did they get you re-engaged? Did you ever feel disengaged? I guess prior to this game, what were your lasting thoughts here after you saw the final score?
Dave, I was a little bit confused of what I saw in the previous weeks, but I think it kind of points to college football as a whole. Like, I was confused by college football in its entirety this year because nobody's playing anybody, so I understand that. But I think what was confusing to me about Michigan was their sense of direction. They were missing that sense of leadership. And you have noticed since Jim Harbaugh has stepped back into the locker room, this is a completely different team with a different game plan and a different vibe. I can't believe I'm saying this, but the Jim Harbaugh difference is real. And he's like a mastermind, dude. I think he meant it to be this way. So he's kind of like, yo, you see what you were missing without me? I've been sitting home just drinking milk and eating steak, and now look, you guys miss me? I'm back. And all of a sudden, they throttle Nebraska, Dave. I mean, and when I say throttle, they could have beat Nebraska 75-0 if they would have played their starters that entire game. They probably could have scored on every possession. Nebraska's in a little bit of a bad way. I understand that. But I don't know if you consider Nebraska a top 10 Big Ten team or not. I probably would. But I think Michigan's dominance shows you where they fall in the landscape of college football right now, and they're starting to get it together, and that's scary for the rest of college football because of their experience and because of their coaching staff.
Yeah, things finally clicked for Michigan. I asked you about the disengaged, re-engaged, because that was me. Like, not that I was ever disengaged, but it was just, I don't know. Like, even doing these podcasts, I'm like, I don't know what to say. Another bad opponent that they won by 28 points by and didn't cover the spread. Like, it just, they were, something has been missing, and something finally was not missing this last game. And it was like, oh wow, this was the Michigan team that I thought I was signing up for this summer when I was pumped for the college football season. So, you kind of named it, Brant, last week in last week's episode, where you're like, you kind of had a hunch that Michigan going on the road was going to wake them up a little bit and bring out something different in them, and it absolutely did. They were more focused, they were more prepared, they were good from really every position group, and that was the first game I walked away and I'm like, I don't got a lot of complaints. Like, that looks like the dominant team that I thought could compete for a national championship this year. So Brant, to flip it back to that, because we haven't been there in a while, right? Like, back in July and early August, it was talk about national championship or bust. Now, that has not changed. I mean, throughout all of these games, it hasn't changed. But the idea of a national championship, watching them these first few weeks was just like, dude, I don't know. This looks like a 2 or 3 loss team. Like, that's how I felt for a while. They finally get it right against Nebraska. I want to know, and I want to quickly run through the AP top 10, and I can lump some of these teams together, like some of these Pac-12 teams we can do all together. But I want to know, like, as it stands today, who would give Michigan, I don't want to say, would Michigan beat them? Who would give Michigan the biggest challenge right now? Michigan's ranked the number 2 team in the country. Some people will argue that they're number 1. Georgia had another very close game at Auburn. Whatever, they're undefeated. They're back-to-back national champions. I, for one, am not going to take them off the throne until they lose a football game. So Michigan sits at number 2, so I think it's pointless to go through and say, would Michigan beat this team or that team? I just want to know, like, who poses the biggest challenge right now looking at this AP top 10? Because, Brant, these are all teams that could make the college football playoff. 9 on down to 1, I'm looking at it right now, are all undefeated. And so I'm actually going to start at number 10. I'm not even going to go to Alabama, number 11. I'm not going to go down there right now. I'm going to start at number 10, Notre Dame. Do you think Notre Dame would pose a real threat to Michigan this season?
I don't think so, Dave. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time breaking this down. But Notre Dame doesn't have the defense to stop Michigan. Michigan would lean on them. They would break them probably by the third quarter. And Sam Hartman's a good quarterback, don't get me wrong. But they don't have the outside threats to really challenge Michigan. I think they would find themselves probably by a 20-point loss.
Okay, I don't know if it would be that type of landslide, but I think Michigan is just clearly the I can't say clearly, that's even unfair. We haven't seen them play anybody. We've seen Notre Dame play somebody, but I just agree with you. I think Michigan's just in a different tier right now, talent wise. I don't think Notre Dame could. I bet they keep it within a touchdown. But Brant, I want to look at these next three undefeated teams, Pac-12 teams. Same category here. USC, Oregon, Washington. That's 9-8-7 right there. Brant, of those three teams, what team gives Michigan the biggest cause for concern? Because there's a very real possibility they see one of these teams in end of December, early January.
I think the easy answer for people that really watch college football would probably be Washington. I think Washington gives Michigan the biggest threat defensively. And Michael Penix is Dave, we've talked about this on the podcast all year. He's probably a top 3 quarterback coming out in this class. Like, he is NFL ready today. I think the most important thing to remember about these three teams is USC, no defense. They do have the number 1 overall pick and Caleb Williams. That dude is going to go number 1. Don't kid yourself. But I think you saw the lapses against Colorado this weekend. Like, there are chinks in that armor of that defense. That's very clear. It's very obvious. And then we move to a team like Oregon. I think Oregon is good, but I think they are limited by Bo Nix. Like, I think they have a ceiling that is capped. And I don't know if Washington has reached that ceiling yet. They faltered a little bit against Arizona last week, got out to a big lead, and then kind of coasted for a victory. But you're going to have that sometimes. You're going to go on the road, and you're going to have that kind of like, oh, we had a bad couple quarters. But great teams don't have bad games. They have bad quarters. And I think that's kind of what you saw from Washington this weekend. But I think Washington would be my number 1 out of those three.
Washington would be my number 1 as well. USC, I'm high on Caleb Williams just like the rest of the country, but that defense it's not even questionable. The defense is not good. And so I think Michigan would love that matchup. Would hate preparing for Caleb Williams, but they would love that matchup, and they would exhaust that team. Oregon, I think, could keep a close game with Michigan. I think they're on a different level, though. I still think Michigan is on a different level than Oregon. Interesting that you say that Bo Nix kind of limits him. He's like the heart and soul of that team. But I hear you. It almost seems like Oregon has reached their ceiling already. Maybe that's unfair to say, but I don't know how much better they're going to get. Washington, on the other hand, I feel like they haven't even hit their next gear yet. And you're right, Brant. Michael Penix Jr. is definitely in the top 3 in the quarterback group with Caleb Williams and Drake May. I feel like they've got another gear still to go, which is scary. They're also, because they haven't necessarily been on this stage yet in this type of level, there's a possibility they could drop a game. Could drop 2 games. Like, I don't know yet because I haven't seen it yet from them, but they scare me. They're the one team I think they would be a very difficult team for Michigan to prepare for. Brant, go ahead.
I don't want to see any teams in the college football playoff that wear purple, and I'll just leave it at that.
Well, yeah, PTSD. Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna hop around a little bit and do number 6 and number 4 because let's stick with the Big Ten. Penn State, Ohio State. We've got plenty of time this season to talk about these teams. Brant, your thoughts quickly on where things stand with both programs.
I think it's pretty obvious with Ohio State. They've got to get their offense figured out, and I'm so sick of this. We'll figure it out from Ohio State fans, and nothing personal against Ohio State fans, whatever. But to just assume that Kyle McCord is gonna start putting up 40 points a game, I think that's ridiculous. Like, you put up 17 against Notre Dame, and it took everything that you had, and you saw Duke do basically the same thing that Ohio State did against Notre Dame's defense. Like, they didn't light it up. They got stymied. Like, Duke's offense just as good as Ohio State's? I don't know for sure. Like, I don't know that. And I think you're going to find out this weekend when they play Maryland exactly what this team is all about, because Maryland's going to bring it into Ohio State. Like, I don't think they're scared of the Big Three anymore in the Big Ten East, and we're going to see what they have. On the flip side for Penn State, we talked about this already, Dave. We don't know what Drew Aller is. Like, we haven't seen enough. We're both not sold on him. I know that. That defense is real, though. And I think in a matchup between Penn State and Ohio State, I'll just say it, Dave, I like Penn State right now.
As it stands today, I like Penn State too. I do think, like, ironically, Ohio State's got their defense is the strong suit of their team right now, and that seems weird to say when I look at them having the two top receivers in the country, or for sure number one, but two top five receivers in the country. They leave a lot left to be desired. I agree that there's this narrative that's like, well, like Ohio State just hasn't unleashed it yet, or like they're holding something back, or I don't know, Brant. I mean, to be honest with you, that felt like us with Michigan like a year ago, where it was like, no, they're holding something back, and I mean, it did. They turned it on against Ohio State with some big plays when they needed it, and they had to come back against TCU, I guess, when they needed it. But it was never, I mean, Brant, when 10 of your games or 11 of your games are not dominant, and Ohio State has not looked dominant right now, I'm not super bought that they are going to, they will get better, don't get me wrong, like they will. But I don't think this is going to be the offense that many people were expecting. Now, we knew that there were questions around the quarterback. Like, that's been a well-known thing since, spring ball. But I think people thought when you just put the names on paper, right? Like who's there is like, there's no way, like whoever you put at quarterback is just this thing's going to click. And that has not been the case. And so, yeah, I think Penn State from the defensive side, Penn State's defense is better right now. So it will be an interesting matchup. I think it would be super close. But yeah, right now, even though I'm not high on Penn State's offense either, I would give the edge to Penn State. Brant, over to the ACC real quick. Number 5 team, the AP polls, and that would be Florida State and Jordan Travis. Your thoughts on them and how they would match up against Michigan? Do you think that they could give Michigan a run for their money?
Yeah, they absolutely pose a threat. Anytime you bring a guy like Johnny Wilson, like he's like a 6'7" receiver. I mean, he's just a monster. A dude like Keon Coleman, who is an absolute stud of a wide receiver. And I think he's number 2 behind Marvin Harrison Jr. right now as far as wide receivers go in this class. Absolutely, he is. As far as throwing the ball, absolutely they pose a threat. I think that if Michigan got in a game with them, I think Michigan once again could lean on them, wear them down a little bit. They kind of survived against Boston College and Clemson both this year. Clemson has a kicker that isn't just fresh out of science class. Like, they probably lose that game. So I do like Michigan in a matchup with them, but Florida State can score points in a hurry, and Michigan, that's kind of been a struggle with them in the past, right? Like, a really good passing game can give them problems outside of Ohio State, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the only thing I would say about Florida State is that, yeah, they've had those two games. They've been close and been tested, but they won both of those games. Something we haven't really seen from this Michigan team yet. Like, and that's kind of rounds out like the rest of the conversation for me as we look at these, these last couple of teams. Is I don't know, to be honest. Like, yeah, I think Florida State would pose a real threat to a team like Michigan, because we just don't know as it stands today. Like, what does this team look like against a really good offense or someone that can get points on you in a hurry? How does this defense respond? Brant, the secondary is not going to get tested until November when you get the Penn State, Maryland, Ohio State slate of games. And so, yeah, I think Florida State would definitely pose a threat to Michigan. I think Michigan's a better team, but I'm not sold on saying that they would win that game. And then Brant, want to also get your thoughts on Texas. They are number 3, and then Michigan, and then Georgia will hit on last. But your thoughts on this Texas team? Are you high on them? I mean, I feel like people are either one way or the other with Texas. Either they're not buying this team yet and they're frauds and we'll see against Oklahoma this weekend, or it's the other side where it's like, dude, Quinn Ewers, what they got going in Texas, like, I don't want anything to do with that. Your thoughts on where they're currently at?
I'm so going to ride the middle here. I'm so going to wait for this Oklahoma game. Now, I don't think Oklahoma is world beaters, right? But they're a top 15 team in college football. I think that Texas has been good, maybe not great, has had struggles here and there, but for the most part, you go to Tuscaloosa in a night game and you beat Saban. I will reserve judgment until after this Oklahoma game, but I do like Texas. If Texas were to match up with Michigan, I still like Michigan in the matchup. However, I'll see them this weekend. I'll put it that way.
Texas seems dangerous to me. I'm higher on Michigan just because, and I think I said this earlier in the season. I picked Texas in my preseason college football playoff predictions. The thing about Texas is I do believe that they are good. I mean, clearly they went in and beat Bama at Bama. Not easy to do. I just feel like they're a year away or 2 years away, even as a program. They seem like Michigan, to be honest. And I know they're different style of play, all of that, but they seem like Michigan a year ago, 2 years ago. Good, on the verge of something great, but they have not been on that stage yet. And so for that reason, I still like an experienced Michigan team over Texas. Brant, last but not least, before we get into the betting segment, the Georgia Bulldogs, your thoughts on that team as they stand today?
Michigan would definitely be in a ball game with Georgia. It would not be a blowout city. I don't love Carson Beck. He's okay. Don't get me wrong. Brock Bowers is him. I totally get it. I love Brock Bowers, but I don't absolutely love Georgia this year. I think it would be a great football game.
I agree. I'm hesitant to say that. I really am, because it's like I thought that, to be honest with you, when they had Stetson Bennett, and it just, I don't know. Like, Carson Beck is not Stetson Bennett. This defense is not what it was, but they're still very good. And I don't know. Just something gives me concern. Georgia is the beast. It is David versus Goliath. Now, maybe from a talent standpoint this year, you can argue that it's not. But for me, Georgia is that team. Michigan has a beat Georgia drill for a reason, and it's a respect reason, and saying they're at the top tier of college football. And so I think it would be a really close game. I'm not sold that Michigan would go in and beat Georgia as it stands today. Ask me in November. I may have a different answer. We'll see.